Can I ask Dr. Shoaib Suddle, former Director General Intelligence Bureau, to come and honor us with their speech? And I've been told that we need to try to keep the discussion a little short so we can have questions and answer session as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Seema Ghani. First of all, let me, congratulate you on opening this session in rather unconventional manner. So I think we hopefully will get something more useful out of it. I begin by thanking Dr. Muradian for inviting me to this important event and this historic setting. We are really enjoying the hospitality of this great city. I'm not going to go into, all these details, which I think most of you already know. I'll be slightly more focused on terrorism and then the way forward. What can we possibly do? Although, as was mentioned in the inaugural speech by Dr. Seema Ghani, the solutions are not easy. The challenges are huge, but we are always struggling when it comes to finding out and applying effective solutions. We all know that terrorism poses a very serious threat to the society, especially in this part of the world, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and also whatever vision we have of our societies as moderate and progressive societies. Since 2001, as we know, and more specifically since 2005, Pakistan has lost almost 55,000 lives in this fight against terrorism. And this includes more than 5,000 security personnel, police officers, as well as the other security institutions. A very large number, in hundreds of thousands, have sustained serious injuries. Economic losses alone have been estimated to be over 100 billion US dollars. But besides these direct economic losses, the fight has posed a serious challenge to already fragile law and order situations in our countries, and with a serious threat to even the financial sectors. So it is in this backdrop that I would like to, move forward. Although I must say that there were some statements made yesterday, which I felt honestly that rather than going for sweeping statements and accusing certain countries of the region as well as in the neighborhood, it would have been perhaps more useful if we had spent that time in providing the solutions and moving forward, rather than being a prisoner of the past. But let me emphasize that we all know that Pakistan and Afghanistan both have changed in ways beyond recognition in the past, several years, starting with 1979, and the situation is still, not very satisfactory. What is the solution? The solution lies in more and more cooperation between the two countries, between the neighbors as well as countries of the region. When we say that, more and more cooperation, it's a great, huge challenge, because ensuring cooperation between the agencies involved, even within countries, is not always very easy. We have to, as Dr. Seema Ghani said, we have to prioritize what we want to achieve. From a practitioner's point of view, people who would be sitting in this hall, say, after 1,000 years from now, would be discussing same sorts of issues, same sorts of challenges. So we can't solve every problem, but yes, we can prioritize, and that is how our limited resources can give us better value. The challenge is now becoming even more acute as we are into that phase where the US and NATO forces are leaving this region. Although there is always, a debate that when these forces were here, to what extent they actually succeeded, and particularly in the context of the challenge of, for example, the drugs that have continued to rise in this country ever since 2001 in particular. Before that, we know that there was a period of lull during the previous setup. But obviously, the reply which we often get is that, this was not part of the mandate. So we leave that thing beside. What I'm trying to say is that the people who are involved in law enforcement in particular, who are involved in dealing with these issues, they have to know each other. I think this is the most important lesson of my career of over 40 years. When I was heading Balochistan police, and I took up that position the same week as 9/11, was there for more than 3 years. A 7-year-old girl was kidnapped from Quetta for ransom. And now the girl was being held on the Afghanistan side of the border, close to Chaman, the Afghanistan side of the border, close to Chaman. But we were receiving telephone calls, from our own numbers. So I knew the governor of Kandahar because he used to come to Quetta quite often. I discussed this matter with him, and he said, no problem. So we went for a joint operation, and the operation succeeded. We got the girl recovered. In another situation, one of the most wanted persons in Quetta went to Malaysia. I knew the Inspector General Police there because we used to get together at different conferences. I spoke to him on telephone, and the third day, we got the man back. We couldn't have got it even in years. So that is, I think, the most important lesson that at least I have learned, that people across must hold frequent meetings with each other. They should have the same narrative, unlike certain things which are fed, just to keep us, on different pages, because the criminals know that if we are not on the same page, it will only be to their benefit, not to our benefit. So that is how we can exchange information on a more timely and in a more meaningful manner. That is how we can standardize our operating procedures. I say on both sides, but my own vision is that it should be for the whole region. So we also need to assist each other to the extent possible in capacity building, in training, because when I say standardization of operating procedures, it includes all that. I would even like to include standardization of equipment, because I've served in areas where, within, if you are posted, say, to a district which borders two other provinces, you are unable to communicate even with those two districts, because everyone has purchased different sets, wireless sets, different frequencies, and so that benefits only the criminals. So we need to maybe have equipment which can help us in ensuring interoperability. Similarly, apart from these, measures which pertain to the relevant officials, public officials who work in the system, I think the most important thing which we need to do is to activate the civil society. Let them meet each other on more frequent basis. And it is only then that this narrative will change. Unless we, get out of the discourse which we were somehow given yesterday, I think we won't be able to make any progress. So we are sometimes in the habit of going for bashing one country or the other. But most of what we say is not based on facts. There is no evidence. It's only anecdotal, stories. So let the civil society help us. Let them meet, the sort of track through things which we are doing in many fields now with India. I think something similar needs to be done in the context of Pakistan, Afghanistan situation as well. My own view is that our biggest failure, the states have, is that we haven't upgraded our anachronistic and outdated criminal justice systems. When you have a poor criminal justice system, this in itself is a cause of social disorder. We have to be absolutely clear about this. If we want to really, improve law and order and go for more secure and stable environment in our countries, then we must, and I say we must, invest as much as we possibly can in our criminal justice systems. I personally feel if we fail to do that, there will be more extremism, because one of the reasons of this extremism is the state's failure to provide justice. If your system takes 20 years to settle a dispute, and most of it is based on corruption and connections you have and so on and so forth. This is causing helplessness and hopelessness, in the younger generation, although there are other factors as well. There is poverty, there is a state of anomie, which means a state of normlessness, which prevails, in some parts of our societies. So we need to reinvent the whole system, starting from police or whatever law enforcement agency is there, then prosecution, then even the defense side, the lower judiciary in particular, and our prison systems. So as you are familiar, we almost had this IS created in Pakistan in 2009 when we took action in Swat. But this region, our Fatahs and, on the opposite side, on the Afghan side, though we have created, over 800 border posts, but obviously those still need to be properly manned and adequately met from the other side. Reciprocity has to be created. But more importantly, a sense that we work for a common mission. It's not that, we have different agendas. If we continue to say that we have different agendas and we continue to blame each other, then that would not change the discourse. So I've mentioned some of the things, but this is not all. I wanted to have, discussion on other aspects which fuel terrorism, which is drugs and corruption and organized crime. I've been personally involved with the work of UNODC, and I really want to place it on record, the UNODC's good work in this direction. I was part of that expert group meeting in 2003, which was held in Mauritius. So we are rather grateful to UNODC for taking this task and helping us to draft our local legislations in a manner that can serve our purpose. But basically, all these factors, whether we have good legislation or relatively, less current legislation, will have to be coupled and supported by a law enforcement system on either side, or maybe in the whole region, which works. At the moment, it is not working. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dr. Suddle. Can I ask Dr. Stepanova, Head of Peace and Conflict Analysis Unit, Russian Academy of Sciences, to come and enlighten us? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I would like very much to thank the organizers of this meeting, our hosts. I also need to apologize because I was informed that I should speak at this panel this morning. Like you, I would very much prefer to listen to the Minister of Counter-Narcotics of Afghanistan, but alas, you will have to put up with me. I'll mainly talk about the present stage of expanding opium economy in Afghanistan, its implications, but also will try to give you a sort of Russian perspective, because I happen to come from exactly the opposite end of the chain. Okay, so you are at the source, we are at the end market, and my country actually consumes more Afghan heroin than any other country in the world. Okay, so maybe it makes sense for me to be on the panel, after all. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty, as we've heard yesterday, about everything that is going on to happen in Afghanistan. Every aspect, politics, economics, peace process, security, everything. One thing is certain, one thing: opiate production will be growing. No doubt about it. Not necessarily, the situation will not necessarily become radically worse, because there's not much worse that it can get, actually. It is already at its worst in more than 3 decades, at its historical peak. And the worrying sign, of course, is the last year for which we, due to UNODC, we have all this nice data. The last year, 2013, was actually the worst one. The worst one, a historical peak in cultivation, especially if you compare it with the year Russians like to compare it, which is 2001, before the foreign intervention in Afghanistan, when opium cultivation in Afghanistan went like this, by 91% decline as a result of the Taliban ban on cultivation. So like this, you know, and now it goes like this over the past decade. The increase just for cultivation, I don't want to bother you with too many numbers, but the increase just for cultivation, you know, the land under cultivation since 2001 through 2013 has been 26 times. 26 times. Now, it's very common at conferences and international fora to say that, you know, drugs, they threaten all of us. You know, it's an equal challenge to all of us, and so on. Now, this massive surge in Afghanistan's opium output did not affect all stakeholders in Afghanistan in the same way, equally, both in the region and outside the region. So some states obviously suffered a much heavier burden than the others. Much heavier burden than the others from this problem, starting with Afghanistan itself. Because as it was rightly mentioned, of this huge market, $60, $70 billion that are earned on selling, trading in Afghan opiates, Afghanistan itself gets, well, 2.5 billion a year, which is what, 3, maximum 4%. So basically a pittance, a mere pittance of the overall. The main money on the Afghan drugs are earned outside Afghanistan, sometimes very far outside. Yes, of the money that stay inside, some money gets invested into legal economy and other sort of activities, but repercussions, negative effects are also huge for Afghanistan, and you know that probably much better than I do, you know, in terms of growing drug abuse, and by some calculations, Afghanistan actually has one of the highest rates, drug abuse rates per capita in the world. Now, of other states outside Afghanistan, of course, the heaviest burden is being suffered by countries of first and second transit, which means neighbors, all neighbors. So basically, most countries in this room, I've just started basically, most people who are in this room are mostly from countries that suffer extensively from this and disproportionately affected by this problem. And of the end markets, the main end markets, of which we know several, I mean, I would argue that Russia beer is the heaviest burden, to some extent China as well, and increasingly. Why, may one ask? Well, if only just a quarter of Afghan heroin exports go north to Russia, just 25%, which is less than what goes through Iran, which is less what goes through Pakistan. The problem is the structure of that northern route, which is an untypically focused one. So 90% of heroin, at least, that goes northwards from Afghanistan ends up in just one country, the Russian Federation. As a result, you know, our market, hard drugs market, is just completely overwhelmed with Afghan heroin. It is the largest market. The value is kind of disputed. Official Russian data says 6 billion market. But the second largest market is hashish, which is also primarily of the Afghan origin, and so on and so forth. And our economic losses from that are comparable to the size of our national health budget. So 3 to 5% of GDP is what we lose on that. Now, well, Russian market, of course, is overwhelmed by Afghan heroin, but the another largest market, Europe, The situation is somewhat different because the market there is more diversified. There are other serious problems, cocaine, use of new psychoactive substances, and so on and so forth. Opiate consumption has stabilized, and heroin use has even somewhat slightly declined. Although European market is more valuable, the value is higher. But Russia alone consumes as much heroin as the rest of Europe, okay? So the size is comparable, but the value is higher in Europe because heroin is cheaper in Russia. Now, the United States, just to be polite, is hardly affected at all, which explains many things in the way it treats the issue. It has its own suppliers from other parts of the world. It has its own opiate market, but in that market, just 3 to 5% are accounted for by heroin of the Afghan origin. Okay? Just very briefly, now the US, NATO, the Western military and civilian presence failed to significantly affect the dynamics of the opium economy in Afghanistan. But I should say it never aimed at its reduction in the first place. The forces are here for an entirely different reason, security, anti-terrorism, later counterinsurgency, stabilization, and so on. NATO is, well, it's not a development agency, it's not a police force to be able or capable or want to do counter-narcotics. At the same time, over this decade, in the course of the past decade, all basic factors such as the lack of sustainable macro and micro economic alternatives, the weakness of the government, perhaps inevitable weakness of the government, and escalating armed conflict, all these factors fed into, contributed, were extremely favorable for expanding opium economy. Later on, more recently, the US started to pay more attention to these issues, and they pay the bill, They've paid the bill for all these years, although it's just 7% what they spent on counter-narcotics from their reconstruction and institution building budget. But they only tie their enforcement component, in which they assist Afghan forces, Afghan counter-narcotics police, in interdiction operations or lab destruction, for instance, only to traffickers allegedly linked to the insurgency, as if it were the only component of the drug economy in Afghanistan. Well, it's not the only component. Actors of all sorts, other non-state actors, strongmen of all kind, peasants, traders, there are many actors in this economy, not just insurgents. In sum, just to cut it short here, the US NATO presence itself had a limited direct relevance to the dynamics of the opium economy, the presence. So how about the withdrawal? If the presence did not matter, frankly, much, if they get out, maybe that will also have no relevance. Well, this is not so, because I would strongly argue that the withdrawal does matter, maybe more indirectly, but a very fundamental level. Because even incomplete withdrawal leads to, inevitably, and we've seen already signs of that yesterday and elsewhere, leads to declining aid and political commitments in all three key spheres: economic, security, state functionality, which is very important. So basically, the way the gradual withdrawal affects negatively the dynamics of opium economy is because it is often accompanied by the retreat of the state and retreat of development from certain areas and regions. And we see it very clearly in the south of Afghanistan, where partly due to the main drug-producing provinces, particularly Helmand and Farah, where due to previously, in the previous decade, due to development assistance and technological innovation. First, the arable cultivated land was expanded. But now all that is left. You know, the development agencies, they get out, they stop their programs. All these new technologies, you know, solar, mobile power, cheap pumps, and you can dig deeper wells and so on and so forth. So desert into flowers. And as a result, basically, less security, less development assistance. There's no other alternative than for the peasants to come back to expanded, now on a newly available arable land, to expanding cultivation. By the way, I just want to mention, I have to mention, because I kind of look at this from the northern route perspective, it's not just the south that is of deep concern to us, of course, but also the northeast in particular of Afghanistan, because only half of our supply, the supply that goes through the northern route via Central Asia, only half of our heroin comes from the south of Afghanistan, already refined heroin. The other half is manufactured, mostly in Badakhshan. Sometimes from local, they have some cultivation, sometimes from opium stocks, but it's half and half. And there, the cultivation is also growing now, even in the northeast. Now, until recently, and perhaps I should finish, I plan to talk about, at the end, about how this drug problem affects Russia's policy towards Afghanistan. But I'm afraid we don't have time for that, so I have to finish on a different note. I'm almost over. Until recently, there's been one glimpse of hope for Afghanistan itself. Believe it or not, even in terms of illicit drug economy. And it was the fact that, well, what stays in Afghanistan, at least initially, what various actors inside Afghanistan earn from opiate trade, remains roughly at the same level every year. So it doesn't change much. It's roughly the same $2.5 billion. But the size of Afghan formal legal economy has been steadily growing for the past decade. It has been growing. So the proportion that was accounted by opiates in Afghan GDP actually was becoming smaller. You know, so if it used to be like equal to 60% of Afghan GDP, say back in 2003, by 2012, it was just 10–15%. The big problem now with this retreat of assistance and everything is that that legal economy, much of that legal economy that was growing, was a bubble economy. It was dependent on international aid and the sheer fact of international military and civilian presence. All that construction boom, food industries, logistics, private security firms, you name it. And now, actually, we see the reverse. The growth is already slowing down, and we may see the situation deteriorating. In particular, just a couple of economic developments or facts that are particularly conducive to expansion of opium economy. Growing unemployment, of course. This is a ready-made sort of source for all sorts of crime, not just engaging in opium economy. Also, capital flight, something that was already mentioned, to all places ranging from Dubai for the richer people and Turkish housing market for the low to mid-size people. Also, the problem that was mentioned yesterday by our Indian colleagues, the problem of the lack of secure transit route for legal traders, Afghan legal traders. We know Iran and India are doing a lot in trying to kind of create something like that, but so far it's a problem. And finally, all those huge mineral resources that Afghanistan has, well, let's face the fact, they remain largely untapped. There are no large Western bids. There were many hopes initially that, no one wants to invest from the West. The regional biggest bids from China, from India, well, they are in a wait-and-see position. So, I mean, a combination of these things is very conducive to the drug economy. And I have just to conclude at this, that Afghanistan is likely to produce more opium in the coming years, which for my country means in the worst case scenario, we could even come back to the role of a transit country. So far, we are the end market. Whatever comes to us, we consume, okay? But we may even, the surplus of drugs may be such that we may come back to the role of transit country onwards to Europe, to Northern Europe, to Eastern Europe, and so on. I have to finish here. What I had no time to talk about was Russia's kind of, how that affects, how Russia thinks about everything from state capacity to political process inside Afghanistan, but and a number of other things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stepanova. Appreciate it, particularly with that last note of good news. Drugs will grow, yeah? More problems ahead. Thank you all very much, dear doctors, particularly from our neighboring countries, all three neighbors, and from our UNODC colleague, Mr. Feschenko. Thank you very much. But I think the day wouldn't be complete if we don't hear one other Afghan from UNODC. It's Mr. Hashim Wahdatyai, the National Program Officer, and he's promised me that he doesn't need more than 2 minutes. Thank you very much. Please come.
خوشا به حال کسی که اول حرف زد وقت زیاد داشت ما آخر وقت کم داریم به هر صورت. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The topic that I'm discussing about is solely about the counter-narcotics in Afghanistan and the region. I'm from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Afghanistan. بعد از شما بخیر باشه. به خاطر که 2 دقیقه وقت دارم متاسفانه من از تمام گپا میگذرم. 3 نقطه خیلی مهم به نظر خودم روی اولویت قرار میدم. اول اوضاع مواد مخدر در افغانستان، دوم ابعاد مختلفی را که متضرر ساخته و سوم چرا مواد مخدر از افغانستان از بین رفت، چرا حداقل به صفر نزدیک نشد و چرا حداقل کاهش نیافت، رو به صعود است. در سال 2011 1,54,000 هکتار مواد مخدر کشف شد. در سال 2012 1,93,000 هکتار مواد مخدر کشف شد. در سال 2013 2,09,000 هکتار مواد مخدر کشف شد. تولید مواد مخدر در سال 2013 سیما جان 5,500 تن بود. به هر صورتش ابعاد مختلفی را که متضرر ساخته، مواد مخدر یک سونامی پنهانی است در افغانستان که متاسفانه توجه دولت افغانستان جدی‌تری برشان نداریم، از همجوارا را نداریم و جامعه بین الملل هم به طوری که باید توجه داشته باشند نیست. سالانه 150 میلیون دلار از عاید مواد مخدر به طالبان میره، به شورشی‌ها میره. 70 میلیارد دلار که سالانه از عاید مواد مخدر است به کجا میره؟ به مجرمین در افغانستان، منطقه و جهان میره. اونا چی میکنن؟ علیه جامعه افغانستان، علیه دولت افغانستان، علیه منطقه و جهان مبارزه میکنن، جنگ میکنن و ساحه را ناامن میسازن. نه تنها که امنیت را متضرر میسازن، صحت را هم برهم میزنن. در افغانستان 9,40,000 معتادین نظر به سروی یونیورسیتی در سال 2009 بود. 5 سال قبل از امروز. حال تخمینی که میشه در بین 1,3 تا 1,6 میلیون معتاد است در افغانستان. اینا اگر روزانه $1 مواد مخدر بگیرن روز $1,000,000 میشه که $1,000,000 در تجارت سیاه میره. نقطه آخر را که میخواستم سرش بحث بکنم که خلاص بکنم گپای خود را، چرا نتانستن که مبارزه علیه مواد مخدر در افغانستان کامیاب باشن و چرا به صفر نزدیک نشدن یا حداقل پایین نافتاد؟ اراده سیاسی جدیتری نبود. در دولت افغانستان مبارزه علیه مواد مخدر در اولویتشان نبود. افغانستان 22 اولویت کاری داره، مواد مخدر در هیچ کدامشان نیست، با وجودی که یک سونامی گشت مواد مخدر در افغانستان. وزارت محترم امور داخله 6 اولویت کاری داره، معینت مبارزه علیه مواد مخدر داره، اما باز هم مبارزه علیه مواد مخدر در اولویتشان نیست. مبارزه با مواد مخدر تنها دولت افغانستان انجام دادن نمیتونه، چون مواد کیمیاوی که از بیرون وارد افغانستان میشه، از طریق کشورهای همجوار وارد افغانستان میشه، برای تولید هیروئین از طریق کشورهای همجوار وارد افغانستان میشه. افغانستان هیچگاه مواد کیمیاوی تولید نکرده و ضرورت هم نداره به خاطر مسائل قانونی. همهشان وارد از راه کشورهای همجوار وارد افغانستان میشه. هرگاه همکاری کشورهای همسایه با افغانستان نباشه، افغانستان به تنهایی خود نمیتونه که به این پدیده شوم مبارزه بکنه. چالش های زیاده که در این راستا بودن. یکی دیگرشان این است که در 2-3 ساله که مواد مخدر در افغانستان افزایش یافت، مجرد که اعلان خروج نیروهای بین‌المللی از افغانستان اعلان شد، دهقانا، قاچاقبرای مواد مخدر، تجارات افغانستان، تجاران غیر قانونی مواد مخدر در افغانستان تشویق کردن برای کشت، تولید و قاچاق در افغانستان. همه افغانستان، همجوار و جامعه بین‌الملل مصروف 3 انتقال عمده در افغانستان بود: انتقال سیاسی، انتقال اقتصادی، انتقال نظامی. متاسفانه که مبارزه علیه مواد مخدر فراموش همهشان شد. اگر این چالش ها فرارای مبارزه علیه مواد مخدر باشه و این چالش ها از بین نرفت، متاسفانه که خبرهای بد در پیش روی خواهد بود. تشکر.
Well done, Mr. Wahdatyai. Thank you very much. This actually takes us really good into the next session, which is regional and international cooperation in Afghanistan, because that was one of the things that kept coming up from all our colleagues, that regional cooperation is required. I have been told that the tea is really out there. If you're dying to ask questions, you can stay behind, and I'll ask our colleagues on the panel to stay with you. Otherwise, you can use also the break to discuss with our panelists. I would like to formally thank Mr. Feschenko, Dr. Zarei, Dr. Suddle, Dr. Stepanova, Mr. Wahdatyai. You have been gems. Thank you very much. And for you all not to have fallen asleep. Does anyone want to really ask question? Is tea 2 people 3? Okay. There is actually an argument I have with my very good colleague here who's responsible for organization. I'm asking her if we can change so that if you want to get tea, you can go and get tea, come back. If you want to stay out there, stay out there. But we can take these 3 questions at least. Do you agree? Okay, let's do it since everybody's really polite and quiet. They can, please feel free. It's not impolite to go and have tea, okay? We can take questions. The gentleman behind the pillar. I think we have one announcement before you guys go out. Do you want to?
Please, yes. دوستان عزیز، پیش از اینکه به بریک برین، میخواستم براتون بگویم که برای میهمانای خارجی و داخلی ما ساعت 7:30 شب پروازشان کنفرم است. Ladies and gentlemen, your flight is confirmed for 7:30 tonight. And also, please come back. We may take 2 questions, but it has to be only 2 questions, not more than 5 minutes. We don't have time. We have another panel waiting, and we really want to get out of here on time because we all have to catch a flight. So thank you very much. We'll see you all. If you can just bring your tea here.
We'll take questions now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, please go ahead, ask your question. Is the mic working?
شكرا جزيلا.
Please.
علي قدور حسين، جمهورية العراق. بداية مكافحة المخدرات لا تقل أهمية.
The mic is not really loud. Can you? Yeah. Can you speak a little up?
Yes. بداية مكافحة المخدرات لا تقل أهمية عن مكافحة الإرهاب، لأن انتشار المخدرات يؤدي إلى الزيادة في الجرائم الجنائية المختلفة كالقتل والتسليب والخطف. فسؤالي
Can somebody translate, please?
هل بالإمكان تأسيس منظمة
Thank you.
دولية
No, there's no
عالمية
translation. I don't know if we have Arabic translation. Do we?
تشرف على الإجراءات في مجال المخدرات من ناحية إنتاجها أو استهلاكها أو أساليب التهريب وطرق المكافحة.
Did you get the question? I'm not actually.
أيضا أحد أهم الطرق اللي نتمنى أن يكون بها إشراف من قبل هذه الهيئة للحد من المخدرات. بعض الدول يوجد فيها منافذ حدودية تدخل إليها تقريبا يوميا أكثر من 1000 شاحنة كبيرة محملة بالمواد. وما توجد هنالك أجهزة أو تقنيات حديثة للكشف عن هذه المخدرات. يتم الكشف عنها يدويا وهذا صعب جدا، بحيث يتم تدقيق عجلة أو عجلتين وهذا غير كافي. بينما تعبر أكثر من 500 عجلة عن طريق هذا المنفذ وهي محملة كل عجلة بأكثر من 6000 كيس اسمنت. فأكيد يتم تهريب مثل هكذا مخدرات وبكميات كبيرة عن طريق هذه المنافذ الحدودية. لذلك المطلوب من الدول الصناعية المتقدمة دعم هذه الدول اللي ما تمتلك أجهزة حديثة وتقنية للكشف عن المخدرات بتزويدها بأجهزة كشف المخدرات. كذلك الاهتمام بمعالجة المدمنين من خلال إنشاء مستشفيات ليست في العواصم فقط بل بعواصم الدول والمدن الأخرى التابعة لهذه الدول. شكرا جزيلا.
much. Let me just see if my mics are on. Thank you very much for your recommendations and your observation. We all agree, as Mr. Suddle, Dr. Suddle was stating earlier, you also need equipment in fighting this, issue, this sector. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything, but I think the discussion has been there, so it's mainly you making recommendations. Thank you very much, and also for your information. There are hospitals, not just enough of them. For 1.5 million people addicts, we have a very small number of hospitals, which is something we will take into consideration in our notes and report on this. Thank you. There's one other hand up, please. Can you pass the mic? Microphone برادر موجود.
با عرض سلام. تجربه را که ما داریم، ما به عنوان کسی که یک فعال مدنی هستم در افغانستان، جامعه جهانی برای مبارزه با مواد مخدر صادق نیست. از شما پرسان میکنیم آیا واقعا همین اراده وجود داره در جامعه جهانی و اون نهادهایی که در این عرصه کار میکنن که از بین ببرن؟
تشکر. Okay, that was another sort of triggering question. Who wants to answer? No, no. We need to ask Mr. Feschenko. Do you want to answer that? Are you loyal? Do you really want to?
Yes, I believe it's more a discussion question. But you see that the international community, if we take most of countries, they have really anti-drug policies. They have anti-drug agencies. They have people, policemen, people who really sometimes, not sometimes, but many of them, they really lose their lives because they are fighting drugs. So if you ask me if there is a will from international community to fight drugs, yes, of course. Yes, it is. But again, the question is that we come now to the question not of prosecution, but to the question of prevention, because the prosecution side, there is definitely a will in countries to fight drugs. But the question is, why are people consuming drugs? Maybe there is something in the human nature. Maybe there is, maybe something should be done on prevention side. Maybe there is something that lies outside of legislation, outside of criminal legislation. Maybe something should be done to decrease the demand. But it's another question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think I understand where my friend over there is coming from. It's because of, the, I think, unsuccessful attempts of the last 13 years. But there are challenges, all kinds of challenges. I can't speak for the international community, I'm sorry. Can I get another question, please? ببخشین شما برادر که مایک دارین همینجا مایک تانه میری؟ تشکر.
Thank you. My question is, if Afghanistan produces so much heroin and so much of the rest of the world prospers from it, why have we never heard from a drug baron in Afghanistan being arrested? You see, in Mexico, in Colombia, in South America, periodically we hear that drug dealers, the big ones, are arrested or they are being hidden. I have never, ever heard any drug lord in Afghanistan. And if there is so much heroin being produced here, there must be drug lords and drug barons here. How come they are never apprehended?
Thank you. If the panel allows, I'd like to answer that question. It's because of corruption. It's because there's no rule of law in this country. A few people have been arrested, we've heard, not people at the top, mid-level, or low-level. People at the top never get arrested. They are the elite of the country. They are the ones that are occasionally invited even to conferences. I'm not talking about this one, but I'll talk to you during the break. I've seen some people. Anyway, so basically, it's corruption in the country. We hope that things will change in the future, but for now, I'm afraid, they are the elite. They're so powerful. I'll take one more comment or question from our colleague here. شما بخیرم. برادر مادر پیشروی. تشکر. Do you agree? Is it corruption, yeah?
ما جناب محترم خانم غنی ما یک تبصره دارم کوتاه.
بفرمایید.
ما به این نظر هستم که قربانی اصلی افغان هاست مواد مخدر، موجودیت مواد مخدر و میزبانی مواد مخدر. ولی یک پدیده است که به افغانستان آورده شده توسط مافیای جهانی. حتی کسی که ما 4 سال در مبارزه با مواد مخدر مسئول بودیم در افغانستان و احتمالاً بیشترین عملیات ها علیه مواد مخدر و معامله‌گرایش ما اجرا کرده باشم، ما به این نتیجه شدم که یک پدیده جهانی است و دولت ها هم به احتمال اغلب هم در همسایگی ما هم در دور از این نفع میبره و تا زمانی که یک اراده قوی جهانی در مبارزه با مواد مخدر به میان نبیاید، ما نمیتونیم که مواد مخدر از افغانستان ریشه‌کن کنیم. و سوال اصلی همی است که همگی سوال داشتن که افغانستان بین 2 تا 5% و این ما خوشبین نیستم که همی رقم هم صحیح باشه، کمتر از داخل افغانستان باقی میمانه، دیگه همه پیسه بیرون میره. ولی همین سیستم های جهانی که علیه پولشویی قرار داره، پلیس جهان، تمام کشورهایی که پلیس بسیار خوب داره، ولی روز ما نشنیدیم که اینا بگه که پیسه که از مواد مخدر افغانستان در کشور ما آمده این به این آدرس است، از این آدرس آمده، این پول در کجا باید بره، ما نشنیدیم. لحاظا ما برای افغانای خود پالوی ازی که صبر میخوایم، ما برشان ای عرضه دارم که منت این مشکل جهانی به دوش افغانان نیستن. ایرا بیرونی ها در دوران جنگ سرد آوردن توفی ظالمانه را در کشور ما و این تلاش مشترک جهانی میخواه و تا او سازمان های استخباراتی، سیاسی و اقتصادی جهانی تا که ضرورت داشته باشه با این پدیده جریان خواهد داشت.
بسیار تشکر. سلامت باشین. من با شما موافق هستم. مردم هر مملکت همیشه مظلوم هستن، همیشه به حساب چیش ویکتیمای هستن که اونا چیزی کردن نمیتونن. این قسمت تشکر. Thank you all very much. I think we still have a few minutes for you to take your tea, and then after that in about 5-10 minutes the next session will begin. Thank you.